Okay, this is a new live stream because the last one, the audio wasn't working. There's some issues. So hopefully this is working now. I'll wait for someone to come on live just to check that this is working. Guys, once you come on, let me know if my audio is working this time. Guys, let me know. I'll start warming up the wrists, start getting ready. Hopefully it's going to work this time. I'm not sure what happened last time. Sounds good. Yes. Winner, winner. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, so I'm going to repeat what I just done. So I'm going to start to work through my straddle position. So I'm just sitting in straddle. And then I'm just going to push the block out in front of me. So open and closing the hips, taking the block further and further away from me. So I'm trying to lengthen the spine as I go into it. If you're super tight in the straddle position, raise your hips up on something. So you might want to raise your hips up on a yoga block, on a box. So I can raise the hips up if I need to in that position, which makes it easier to get into a flatter back position. What we don't want to be doing is rounding the back. Other things that can help to get you into a cleaner straddle position is just get the butt cheeks out of the way. So get into a straddle like that and then just coming down. And then the other thing that I just showed on the last stream was to measure the position. So if you put your back or your butt up against the wall, and then I just push something out in front of me, making sure you still keep contact with that surface behind you. So then I have a measurement between the wall and the block, and I can do that every time I want to assess, and then I can put a mark there or just measure that distance. That'll give you an idea of your straddle position in terms of lengthening the spine, which is really important. So once you guys have done a wrist prep, if you're joining in, we're just going to do a few kick ups to the wall. So we're not going to do any long conditioning holds or anything like that today. I want it to be more about the press handstand and going into the drills straight away. Obviously, if you're lacking with a chest or handstand or conditioning holds, then that's something that needs to be a priority. Probably more so than the press handstand, but definitely start working the flexibility parts for the press handstand while you're doing the more basic drills. Okay, so with the kick ups, I'm just going to place hands down on the floor. I'm going to have a definite focal point between the thumb and index finger. Keep that exactly the same. And then I'm just going to kick up to the wall with light heels touching and then come back down again. So I'm looking for consistency here. So making sure that every rep looks exactly the same. We don't want any difference in the focal point, the shoulder position, the kick. If you're a little bit more stronger in the handstand, do exactly the same thing. Doesn't matter whether it's in front of the wall or freestanding, but same thing again. Every rep should look identical. So the shoulder position, the hand position, the focal point, all are the same when you kick up into the handstand. And if you're touching the wall, the energy you touch the wall with should be exactly the same every time. So you're just kissing that wall every time, ideally with both feet at the same time. So the beginner kicking up would maybe go 1, 2, quite heavy, but the level you're at to do press handstand work is we should be kissing the wall, both heels at the same time, very, very lightly, or kicking up to freestanding hold. And then doing some more flexibility work. So we're going to use the IKEA step. You'll see me using these all the time. I should have a sponsorship of IKEA, really. These are really good because they're super stable, they're cheap, and they have these holes and bits you can grab hold of. Basically, these parts where, so the holes there and the sides. So if we want to work on our flexibility to start with from a Jefferson curl point of view or forward fold, you can go into it different ways. But basically, I'm just going to get as deep as I can towards that forward fold position. I'm actually going to purposely round the back on the way down into this one with soft knees. And then I'm going to try and get over the top of my hip and get as deep as I can. And I could just use the step to measure. So I could go, okay, where do my fingers come to? Do they come to my toes? Do I touch? Do I get down to these holes, the rim? So I know hold, I can normally get fingertips just to touch the floor. So my fingers are just touching the floor there with the knees locked backwards. So that's like my starting point for this position. And then I'm going to go into a similar position, but I'm going to bend my knees and I'm going to see if I can hold on to something. Now, if you're tight in the hamstrings, you could do this on the floor and just grab hold of your ankles or so stand on your fingers. Using a box like this, I can hold on there. So I'm going to put my fingers in the holes and then I'm just going to start to straighten the legs, which is going to pull me over into that deeper forward fold position. So there, I don't feel anything there. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to grab hold of this bottom lip and really get a good purchase of that and then start to extend the legs. Now, this is where I feel a good stretch. It's a little bit nervy through the calves, but it's really going to help to get the hip high when we want to go into that press handstand. So in that position, and then just coming in and out of that for a few repetitions. So when I started, I could just get my fingers to the floor. So after doing that, I can get like first knuckle to the floor now, and I'm definitely can touch much easier. So that's a really good deep hamstring stretch. The other one you can do, which you need to make sure that you've got the flexibility to do it and you're not ramming your head into the wall, is to stand there. You would have seen me do this one on my other videos and bend the knees. And then I'll put my back up against the wall and then extending the legs as much as I can. So taking the elbows down towards the floor. So in that position. So that's a real good deep forward fold hamstring stretch to get the body ready to get more of that hip high, shoulder low position for press handstand. So I'll be doing the pancake work, the forward fold hamstring work, and probably something to do with your upper back. Most people's upper back needs work. So your thoracic extensions with the foam roller, the yoga block, this type of thing. Again, I'll do this with all of my clients in some variation and before all of my classes. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a strength class, whether it's a handstand class, I'll be doing a thoracic extension either on the softer foam rollers or being quite aggressive, depending on the individual. Some Q, you recommend handstand runs for press handstand. What do you mean by handstand runs? Like where you touch the shoulder on the wall? I'm not sure what you mean by the handstand run drill. Okay, and then once we're kicking up to the wall, we now want to start to excite the shoulders. So we want to get the shoulders involved. So when I do a press handstand, my shoulders are super switched on and taking control of the handstand. So if I press, see how my shoulders are there, and I'm going to come up there. So they're open and closed in that position. So I want to get the control and the strength, the conditioning to be able to take the shoulders in this direction. That means I can just bring my legs down because my shoulders are planted slightly in front of my hands. So we want to start to build that strength. There's a couple of different ways we can do this. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the shoulder touching drill. I don't really use it that much. I wouldn't say that's a priority for press handstand. I'd make sure that you can hold chest wall handstand for 60, 90 seconds comfortably, hold a conversation, that type of thing, and then be able to do this drill for the shoulders. So these two drills, so the toe pull, which is just pulling the feet away from the wall in a chest wall position, and the back to wall version. The back to wall version one's really nice because it teaches you, you can incrementally make it easier or harder. So I'm just going to kick up to the wall. I am going to turn my hands out, probably a little bit more than I normally do, but I'm still going to stay pretty close to the wall. And I'm just going to take my shoulder on and off the wall. So I'm going to kick up to there. Going to keep pushing up, definitely not collapsing through the shoulder. And then I'm just see if I can get my shoulder to touch. So my upper back, back of the head, shoulder position is touching. And then I want to be able to push back off in exactly that same position. So I'm not collapsing and then pushing forwards with being collapsed. I'm regaining the height back to that position. You're coming on and off the wall. Now, obviously, the further you come away from the wall, the harder that's going to be. Harder on the wrists, harder on the shoulders. And we don't want to collapse in that void. So just open and closing the shoulder on and off the wall in that position. And notice that I can hold a conversation when I do these drills as well. So we don't want them to be super, super taxing when you come on and off the wall. You should be able to hold control and do repetitions. They definitely shouldn't be like 1 rep max. Jackson, yeah, I saw your message, your comment on the last one about the breathing. Breathing's a real interesting one. Like I say, I can do them with press handstand, hold a conversation while I do it. So the breath isn't involved too much. I'm not actually holding my breath. Now, saying that, if we do any exercise and it's our 1 rep max, we're probably more likely to breathe. So we're probably more likely to hold our breath when we do the movement. Now, you could look at what happens with the breath when we breathe in and when we exhale in terms of um, inter-abdominal pressure, so like the pressure that builds up inside our bodies when we go in and out of a position while breathing, and what happens. So, if you do a heavy deadlift, you wouldn't want to be letting all your air out just before you do the lift because you'll feel like your body's just not connected. So if anything, I would hold the breath, but not with a massive intake of breath before you go into that press position. But you probably want to either slightly hold it. I wouldn't do a big exhale when you go into the position. But we do want to get it to the point where you can breathe normally while you're doing the movement. There's no real movements that I'm holding my breath for in handstand. Maybe when I go into like do a full planche attempt out of a handstand or something, but that would only be for like a split second. So I wouldn't be breathing out excessively. That's the only one I wouldn't do. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, the reason we rotate the hands is just to make it happier for the shoulders to go forwards, and also it makes us slightly stronger. So if I do a squat, I'm going to turn my feet slightly out into external rotation, because internal rotation will make your body bend and collapse a little bit more. So if I do a squat, if I'm in internal rotation, you can see that's weak. But if I go into external rotation, like screwing into the floor, you're stronger. Same when I go into a press, I'm turning my hands slightly, which makes it easier to protract. It makes it easier to keep the arm straight. Same thing when we do that drill up against the wall. So open and closing the shoulder. So once we've got that drill, that position, and we've gone on and off the wall, I just wanted to do the same thing, but turn around the other way. So this is like the toe pull drill. This is like the teaching your body under balance, but we're going to do it specifically for the press. So I'm just going to work on that shoulder strength. Now we can do this in a like a pike push-up position as well, like a down dog. So I'm going to take the shoulders forwards and then just hold there for a few seconds. So I'm planched slightly forwards of the fingers. Hands are still turned out to make it happy and strong in that position. And then I'm going to come back again. Notice how I still look strong there. I'm not collapsing. I'm not losing the positioning of the scapula. It should be feel like you're pushing the floor away from you, and then you've got a strong upper back. So that's a real good way of assessing the position. If it does feel too hard, you could go into a similar position here, go forwards. You could raise your feet up on a box. You could play with different variations of that. Even that start of the press, or the point where Jackson's talking about where you're lifting the toes up. So this point here, exactly the same. So it's all about conditioning that upper back to take your weight. Because obviously when the toes come off, your upper back and shoulders need to take all of your weight and take over control of the handstand and allow you to lift the toes up. If I have a sip of coffee and go into that start of the press position, I'll load my upper back and shoulders, and then notice like my toes have come off, and I can hold there for time because my upper back and shoulders, my traps, everything up here is loaded, the same as like a deadlift position. Hamstrings and butt is loaded, and I can hold that heavy weight off the floor in that position because everything's balanced, but I've got good control in that upper back and shoulders, and I can hold that position for time. Notice that you turn your toes in on the lift off, so that makes it easier. Yeah, you can play around. I'll do funky things with my hips to make them happy. My hips are still a little bit tight through the glutes and the top, so I'll do something different than someone who has a very open hip position with the feet. We'll get into the pathway in a second of the press handstand, and that will make a little bit more sense of what the feet do when you do come off, because that's one thing a lot of people get wrong with the partial range press handstand. and the lift off, like the pathway of the handstand. So we'll have a little rest now off our hands if you have been following along, and just try doing the path of the press from a laying down point of view. Yeah, with the toe pull, so you do look down. So relevant to, so if I'm looking down in the handstand and I have my focal point somewhere between my thumb and my index finger, when I take my shoulder forwards, my focal point moves with my shoulder position. So I'm going to move forwards slightly. So probably if I'm looking there in my toe pull position and I start to pull off the wall, my focal point might move forwards a little bit. Sometimes if you keep it's a little bit confusing, but sometimes if I keep the focal point where it is and take the shoulders forwards, it actually makes me feel like my hips, or encourages the hips to go up and over. But you have to be careful if you're someone like you are, so someone who likes to take the hips over too fast, that can make it happen too fast. So taking the focal point forwards as well at the same time can help you. So it is a little bit more dependent on the individual. So if we just lay down on our backs now, so in this position, and this is where we can start to explore the different styles of press, because most people think about straddle press, but we have the other variations as well. Let me move my saddle out of the way. All right. So if I just go down in like a body line position, so my low back is on the floor now, but my feet are on the floor as well. So let's look at tuck press first. So if I'm in a handstand, so imagine you're in a handstand now and you're going to do an eccentric press. I'm just going to bring my knees to my chest. So my low back is going to push into the floor now. Around this point, it's really pushed hard into the floor. Then I'm going to bring my knees up towards my chest. My butt comes off. My mid back is now on the floor, starting to peel off the floor. And in this position, I'm just going to hold, and then I'm going to straighten the legs as best I can to try and touch my hands while keeping my butt close to the floor. If the butt comes up too high, that's going to make the press handstand feel really heavy. And then I'll do the same on the way down, which is tricky to get that low back to touch. There, then the butt, and then come down into that straight position again, and then just rest for a second. So that's the tuck press path. Now, if we do the straddle press, exactly the same. So hands above the head. If you struggle with the hands there, you can put them down by your side. So now I'm going to go into straddle. Now, when I go into straddle, I'm turning the feet out and going out as far as I can out to the side, keeping the feet as close to the floor as I can. Because if they go up, it's going to make the press heavy again. Now I'm pushing my low back. So this is the bit, if you have a like real strong hip flexors and like to arch the low back, this bit is going to be tricky for you. So you want to push that low back to the floor. And then you turn over, toes start to get closer to the floor, and then all the way up, and ideally getting close to the hands while keeping the hips low. Again, we don't want the hips to come up high. Retrace that on the way back to that start position. And then the other big press that a lot of people go for, the pike press, exactly the same. So as initially when I lift up, I might have a gap in my low back, which is very common in that like 7 handstand position. But then when I start to bring the feet further this way, when I pass that 90 degrees, we need to turn the hip over. And this is where people who have are very good in the like 7 handstand position might struggle here, because they have to have a real big turnover of the hip. So there, now I'm pushing the low back in the floor. Now I'm trying to keep my butt as close to the floor as possible while folding in half. Obviously hamstring dependent. We're going to go down, see if you can get your toes to touch your hands while trying to keep your butt close to the floor, and then reverse that back down again. So that's a really good drill that everyone can work on. There's no demand in terms of balance of the handstand or anything, and really highlights flexibility range for you there. And then the fun ones, will start to turn that into eccentrics in a second. So okay, so let's go for exactly those same press path, but this time on the wall. So I'm going to go through that tuck one first. So I'm going to kick up to handstand. I'm going to do the easier version. There's 2 variations of the back to wall drill. The easier one to start with is to lay everything against the wall, still keep nice and strong through the shoulders, and then I'm just going to roll down through the hips and through the spine until I get my toes to the floor. So I'm going to start with the tuck. So I'm maybe a little bit further away from the wall than I was when we done that shoulder lean drill to the wall. I'm going to take everything to the wall. Now I'm going to try and keep my butt against the wall for as long as possible while I bring the knees down. So the knees are going down towards my chest. Now my low back is on the wall. Now my mid back. When I get to around here, I should be able to extend the legs, still pushing back towards the wall until my tippy toes touch the wall. Now, if I can, I could go back up if I haven't lost my position. Now, a lot of you, when you do that, the wall is going to spit you out and you're going to be over there somewhere and you'll fall down. So that's just telling you either your hands aren't far enough away from the wall, but be careful, don't take them too far away, or you're just not pushing into the wall enough as you come down. If your flexibility is not great, you might find it easier to frog. So take the knees a little bit wider as you come down and then get the tippy toes to touch the floor. So that's the tuck version. And then we have the straddle version. So same as what we've done on the floor. So most people will get the straddle press or the straddle versions easier than the other ones. Exactly the same positioning. So against the wall, back pushed hard into the wall, shoulders pushed hard into the wall, coming down, trying to keep the legs as close to the wall as possible. Down, there's that bit where the hip turns over, low back pushed into the wall, mid back, upper back. Now I reach with the toes to try and touch, kiss the floor, and then ideally go back through. And if you are going back up, take the shoulders back off the wall. Same thing. Most of you are going to get spat out that way unless you have a press already, because you're going to have a gap somewhere there where weight becomes too much in that direction and you fall down. So that's the straddle version. Yeah, so you want the energy of the push going. So imagine if you was freestanding and the wall wasn't here. We don't want to be pushing in that direction. We want to be pushing in that direction. So always up and forwards. So all the energy going that way. So if I was to press here, so there, I'm going to try and get the energy to go that direction, not that direction. That direction means I'll face plant. So up in that way. So I'm pushing my back. So there into the up in that direction. How that makes sense. Okay, then we have pike press. So pike press is the most demanding for most people, because we have the longest lever arm. So now when you go out, the legs are going to be over here somewhere. So it's a little bit more demanding. Most people, to do the eccentric with control all the way down, are going to have their hands quite far away from the wall. So same thing, pushed into the wall, really pushing my low back hard to the wall now. Now my mid back, now my upper back. There, and then back up, keeping the arms straight, and push back out. Now, interestingly, well, actually, it'll be quite nice for you guys who are working on your press to understand that against the wall, all three of those presses, is harder for me to do than the actual press. And that's a lot of the drills around the presses, around the handstand push-ups. The drills are harder to do than the thing once you can do the thing, but you need to do the drills to be able to do the thing. So that's a little bit nice to know that the pain comes first, but then once you've got it, happy days. How much do I recommend training compression strength individually? So compression strength will be dependent on flexibility. So if you're missing flexibility range, I would work the flexibility actively. So with things like straddle ups, holding straddle L-sit positions, visiting a position dynamically. So like doing this type of thing. So say you want to work your straddle, you're thinking you should work your straddle compression. I would make sure that you can, from an open hip position, you can come down, like touch, open back out again. So I'm open and closing that straddle range. I can sit down on the floor in my straddle. I could stand back up, opening, that type of thing. I would work that as a priority, like the straddle flexibility work, like doing this compression work, doing this stuff, doing circles with the straddle is all really, really good. But I would add that on as an addition to the straddle flexibility and mobility work. Because if you don't have the range, so if I can't lean forwards this way, I'm definitely not going to be able to lift the legs up that way. Doesn't matter how much I try. So I would work flexibility, make sure you have the range, unless you're someone that has great flexibility already, and we just need to fill the gaps. But even then, I would still do mobility, so build strength through that range as a priority, then the compression. Okay. So we've been through the eccentrics against the wall. Now, if you have a freestanding handstand now, we need to look at the pathway through the eccentric freestanding. So video from the side with all these drills so you can assess yourself and see what's going on and try and work out where your gaps are. So if I do a eccentric press, so I'm in a freestanding handstand, and then I'm just going to slowly come down through the movement. So I kick up to freestanding. Let's just do tuck to start with. So there, I'm going to bring my knees down towards my chest. Start to round through that low back, mid back. That point, start to reach to the floor. Well, I'm not doing the concentric, we're just doing the eccentric. So just finish with your tippy toe on the floor. Now that should look the same as this, but less weight. So this one, I'm going to be like this, coming down all the time. The one we just done there is like this. So I'm touching the wall, there's no energy. So the in between that drill, the freestanding one that a lot of people will struggle with, because obviously balance needs to be priority there. The leaning up against the wall where there's no balance required, and I'm touching the wall but there's no weight on the wall, is that in between one in some ways harder than the freestanding once you can do the freestanding. So doing the same drill but being really close to the wall is really important. So you can go through the tuck, the straddle, and the pike through that eccentric. Just try and land with tippy toes on the floor. If you land heavy, video yourself. Try and see what point you lose the position and fall down, and then try and do it against the wall. See if you can fill the gap. So think of it as like time under tension. So if I only do bicep curls like this, I'm not training this part here. So and if I had my dumbbell there and I go like that and then do the strength work, and then I get back up to that position by assistance or momentum, I'm not filling this gap. What we need to do is fill the gap on the press. So have a look through where you're dropping, where you're missing time under tension, and then see if you can work out a drill that you can do and fill that gap. Okay, so once we've played with our eccentric, we've assessed where our gaps are, then we can start to look at going up, the concentric. So probably the easiest way of looking at the eccentric is the concentric is to go partial range. So that's where I've got the steps, the wooden box, different things to put your feet on at different heights. Now I'm going to make a YouTube video specifically on this because I think there's a gap, but think of I don't know if I can do a picture to demonstrate this, but think if my feet start here at the bottom of the press, they come round. So this is like a back view. So they come through this arc as they go up. So they would go, both feet would go around like that. So, and then finish in that handstand there. So if that was like, that's the back of me there, or the front. So if I come down, so your straddle handstand would be there somewhere. So you're in the middle. Hands there. This probably makes no sense, but it should all make sense in a minute. So that position, so your straddle's there. So if I'm halfway between my straddle handstand and the floor, my feet are going to be there. So there's this arc the feet have to make on the way up. So if I do a partial range, if I want to use a partial range at the close to the bottom of the press, so I might put two boxes there. The boxes need to be that far apart. So if my feet would be on the box. If I want to go higher and I use a bigger box, the boxes need to be that far apart. And this is the thing that a lot of people get wrong when they train. If I'm at that height, the box needs to be that far apart. That's a terrible drawing. It's not balanced. But so I hope that makes sense. So as you come off the press, your feet are close together. As you go wider, the feet start to go up and out. So the distance between the boxes need to change. So I'll show that now in real life, and it should all make sense instead of being that weird drawing. Yeah, so that's really common. It gets stuck between the anterior posterior tilt on with the butt turning over on the legs. So probably the easiest way to do it is to bend the knees slightly. So if you're doing a straddle, if you bend the knees slightly or encourage the hip to go into a posterior position. So think of like a real deep squat. There's a point where your hip turns over, goes from an anterior tilt to a posterior tilt. In squats, you call it the butt wink, when the butt turns over. So we need to try and get the butt to turn over. Now, one of the common things that happens, and you get it in like doing toes to bar or something, is that your hip gets stuck in this anterior position like this because you've turned the hip flexors on. Now, when you turn the hip flexors on, it pulls you into an anterior position. And then to get the hip to turn over in a posterior position, it's like the hip flexors have to let go and turn over. So if you bend the knee, that can help that happen. So trying to round over, or try not to go into such an aggressive anterior tilt. So it's really common when people do lots of yoga. They get stuck in that anterior position when they try and bring their legs down towards the press or up, and they can't get the turnover. So they have a gap between the bottom of their press and the floor. So that's really, really common. And that's why when people do the partial range, they get stuck on a height that's too high for them. So they should be on a lower height. So let's have a look. If I do a press from the back or film this way. So if I do a press here, so let's do straddle press, but the same applies to whichever press you're doing. You just have to work out where the things need to be. So if I do a straddle press here, I start in that position so the toes are level with the hands, and then I come out. So if I'm going to use a surface like yoga blocks, I would need to be there. So there's my yoga blocks. So that's where I just measured they had to be. So now when I step on those, there's my partial range from that height at the correct distance to make sense when I go up. Now, if I can't do it that height, I need to go higher. I need to work out where's my toes going to be. So if I press up, again, hands in line with, so feet in line with hands, I come out to this position. So that height, now my toes need to be there. Another reason why you need IKEA steps. So there. So we're going to be in quite a straddle now, probably the widest straddle position. There and there. So that makes sense. So if I'm going to go higher than that, the box is going to have to be where the path is on my toes, and I can start to play with going up. Now, what happens there when we go into the partial range? Now, obviously, I can press, so I can spend time at those different positions and play around there. You're probably not going to be able to do that. So if we do this method, but backwards, so we start with a high surface. Now, I've only got one of these boxes at the moment. I'm getting some more equipment soon. So ideally, I would have two of these boxes. These boxes are really good because they have 3 different heights. I can turn them over at different heights. But if you watch from the side, so I'm going to mimic what it'd be like to have 2. Actually, I'll use these P-bars, but imagine there's 2 boxes there. So I go in that position. This is really sketchy. Don't do this yourself. So now when I go put my feet up on the box, I'm going to walk my hands in underneath my shoulders and my hips to the point where I feel like I can lift off in the press. So if I put my feet up on a box, so there, and I put my foot up on the other box, it's being mimicked by the P-bars. So now I'm going to walk in, which is very sketchy on that P-bar. So there, now my hands are more or less underneath my shoulders. I can feel that my hip is on top, and then I can lift up into my handstand from there. Now, if I want to use a lower height, exactly the same thing. And I would just keep testing this. And don't necessarily give up because you don't get up at a height. I would test lower as well. And you can start to look at that low back, what's happening there. Because most people on that box height, you're still going to be in an anterior tilt in the pelvis. We want to see when we get into a posterior tilt. If you're a little bit stronger like me and not so flexible naturally, then you might find a lower height is actually easier because you can get to that stronger posterior position. So do that same thing, but now with the IKEA steps, getting that distance roughly right. Now I know the distances just from doing this a lot of times. And I'm gonna go into that same thing with the IKEA steps. I'm gonna walk my hands in. So in that position, so there's no way I could press now. So I need to walk in until we get that hip more on top of the hands. Then I feel like I can press. So I hit that sweet spot. So I can move the hands in, I can slide the feet forwards, or I can walk the feet forwards. I'm trying to get the hip to align on top. That's where the magic happens, and that's where you can go up. So that's the partial range press. You can work repetitions. You could just work on slowly making it harder and harder by decreasing. You could start with the hardest variation, see if you can get up, and then slowly increase the height. There's benefits of doing different ways, and I use different ones with different clients depending on where their gaps are. Yeah, puppy press is one that I don't train, I don't teach, but it's a fun one to play with to try and feel the hip position, especially if you have flexibility, and gets the feeling of the float to come up. So you can work the puppy press. I've never programmed it. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's a useful drill just to feel going up. I often use it in handstand class because you get a lot of people being able to float and go up in the air who can't necessarily press yet, but it gives them that feeling of it. So with the puppy press, basically the easiest way of getting into it, I think, is you better see my hands. So if I try and get up off this position now, so my hip needs to be on top of my hands, that's where I can go up. But if I can't get up there, I can cheat if you want to get my hip to go sideways to get more on top and take my shoulders forwards. If you're more flexible, it won't look so planchy as mine does. So I go up onto tiptoes. Now I walk to the side. Now I'm putting the hip on top of the hands, but from the side. I can lift this leg up and pull myself up by pulling that leg, which is actually pulling the hip over the shoulder and then going up. So that will give you the feeling of press handstand. Now, one thing you can do there to help yourself get up is, again, good if you're flexible. I want to use that anterior tilt in the pelvis. Is I'll put a yoga block there, place my hands there, and then when I walk to the side, I step on the yoga block, which gives me that extra height, which is like a partial range puppy press. Stuart, your 4-year-old daughter got her first press yesterday. Yeah, that's not fair. But that's life. I know what that's like. You see my daughter walking around, my 6-year-old in Bridge. You've probably seen the videos of her in back bends doing walkovers and stuff. It's crazy. And she learned that from watching a gymnastic thing on YouTube, just doing rep after rep after rep. It's nothing to do with me. Okay, so that was the puppy press. I'd play with it, especially if you are flexible. Just be careful with it though, because it does encourage you to use that anterior tilt. We want that posterior tilt and that rounding of the low back to help you get into the position. Okay, the other one I want to work on or go through, which, because what you got to look at with these different drills is each drill is going to be good or bad for the individual person. So some people who are flexible need to work some of the strengthening drills, where they're getting into that posterior tilt in the pelvis, that rounding of the low back, getting the shoulders to come forwards of the hands and building that protraction strength. Someone who's already strong will be better off just like low partial range presses, even bending the arms a little bit, which is a naughty word when it comes to press handstand. but it can definitely help you to get the hip into position. So what I mean by that, so we have this sweet spot, and I normally talk about this one first. I haven't spoke about it on purpose today. I wanted to go through the other stuff first, but that position where we do that test to see the hip crease being on top of the hand. So if I get someone to measure or I video from the side and look where this hip crease is relative to the hand, when it becomes on top of the hand, then I can float. So you can measure how close does your hip crease become to your hand. When it gets right on your hand, you might notice that your toes get very, very light. You might not be able to go up, but there'll be no weight in your toes there. So if I now completely forgot what I was going to say. Oh, bending the arms. So if I come to here and I can't get my hip on top of my hands, watch what happens when I bend the arms. My hip's pulled on top, then I can lift. Now, obviously, that's a lot of strength involved in that. But if you're someone who's stronger, that could be a way of you getting into the press. And then over the reps and time, you've got to try and decrease the amount of arm bend and try and get rid of it. So the risk is that you create a bad habit, but it allows you to start press handstanding, and then you can just focus on eccentrics with dead straight arms coming down. So long as you program that in the right way, bending the arms, I think, is a really good way of getting your press quickly. It's no different than really planching your shoulders forwards to get the hip on top. It's just using more strength, and then over time, you want to get it so it's flexible, or you've got the flexibility, so you don't need to planch the shoulders, you don't need to bend the elbows. Then you can bang out 10 reps of presses instead of 4 because they're so taxing. So the other thing I wanted to go through was momentum. So using momentum for your press handstand, so through jumps and things. Do you think it is okay to train the handstand at least 30 minutes before a specific routine? Do you mean so you do handstand balance and then you do strength, like a strength session or something afterwards? So you do handstand balance and then go into another like training legs or bench press or is that what you mean? Because that's actually how I mainly program. Is I'll do balance work first for someone, depending on what they're going to do next. They might be they do this style of training. Maybe they do CrossFit, so they do their CrossFit training here, and then before their CrossFit training, we'll do some flexibility work and 20 minutes handstand, half an hour handstand. So you're doing your balance work, nothing too strenuous, but more balance, flexibility work, and then afterwards you go into your strength work. Or whatever it is. So play tennis, do yoga, whatever it is, you have it there following. So that's how I would normally program, because realistically, telling someone they need to do all separate sessions throughout the week there's a very few and far between people that can actually do that. Yep, so that's done that one. Found a big difference with head position and opening the shoulders. So what do you mean on that, Stuart, about head position and opening the shoulders? In terms of it helping you press by having a different head position and doing like flexibility work to open the shoulders, or was it a positioning thing? So in terms of momentum, so we've got those 3 presses that we're talking about today. So we have the pike press, the tuck press, and the straddle press. So we can mimic the path of those in the handstand by jumping. So I can jump through that movement. So yes, less planche. If you get more flexibility in the shoulders and the upper back, you can definitely just squish more. And there's the chest to wall handstand press drill, the back to wall handstand press drill that can all really help. Yeah, that's perfect. You can, so in terms of that, so what Stuart's talking about, and then this last comment, I can press with straight arms, but using pure strength because my compression is pretty bad at the moment and tight hamstrings. Yeah, so that's more flexibility, so not necessarily compression. So if you get the good flexibility, you don't need to use compression so much. I think there's people think who can't press, who haven't got the feeling of a press. I think there's this idea that compression is the secret. Now, there is obviously compression is good to have in terms of squishing the body together, but to actually press, you need to open, not close. So as soon as you get that point where I get enough weight forwards, my toes come off the floor, I need to open in some way to go up to handstand. It might be a very small opening if I sweep the legs out around to the side, but it's open into handstand. So you definitely don't need to compress to open. So, but one thing that's going to show you both of those things is to close your window you have to press. So if I have a box and a wall, so if I make myself a window, so I've now confined myself to this much space to do a press handstand. So I've got a one workout, can I fit in there? And then can I open? It's a little bit easier for me because I've got this bit in the wall there. So I can come into this position, place my hands on the floor, and now I can press in that gap and see if I touch the wall on the way up, which I don't. I might touch the garage thing, no. And then I can see if I can get back down through that. And that shows me how much gap I need, how much space. If I planche the shoulders forwards, I'm going to hit the box. I need to move the box out. So I could just do, if I have a press, but it's planchy, I could do my mobility work, but it might be a habit. The way I press might just be a habit of repetition. So closing this box in slowly when I do my press and see what gap I need and slowly moving it in a centimeter every rep could open up the press handstand into a more compressed position just by doing the drill. So let's quickly go through the jumps. When would you suggest working eccentrically chest to wall with toe assist? So that's another good drill. I think there's a lot of gap in this drill because most people will drop. So it's a great drill if you are close to the press or have a press already. So basically the chest to wall drill is, I'm limited on the wall space here. I need to fill these gaps. So basically you go into a toe position like this, and then we slide the toes down the wall, through the press, ideally finishing. So you're on tippy toes there. But what you'll notice, even when I done that one there, and I was pretty close, I had this distance, probably here, where my toes didn't touch the wall. If I kept them on the wall, I would have dropped really fast because I didn't squish in enough to keep balanced on top of my hands and my shoulders. So there's that gap. So anyone who doesn't have the strength to fill that gap will fall, and there'll be no time under tension in that gap. So they're not going to be able to train the gap. So the chest wall, that's a great drill if you're someone who has the press who wants to make it cleaner, but I don't think it's the best drill by itself. It's still a good drill that you could use for people, but I think you need to do other variations where you have time under tension through the gaps. Okay, let's run through these jumps quickly because I need to finish in a second. So tuck jump, straddle jump, pike jump. So we probably all know what that is. Basically, you can start in a kneeling position or you can start on your feet. So I'm here. So I could start kneeling there and come up and into it, or I could start here, which is probably the best one for most people to go out to start with. So normal standing position in terms of distance from your feet are away from your hands. You might be a little bit further back than you press maybe. So there, I'm going to load the shoulders. I'm going to have my normal focal point. I'm going to bend the knees, but notice the shoulders are staying on top. And then I'm going to jump and go for a straddle jump. So I pass through straddle, finishing the handstand. I could do that back to wall and actually kiss the wall if I don't have the balance. So there I use momentum from the legs to jump up. Now, if you think of that momentum as a dial, I'm just going to turn the dial down so I don't use as much momentum. Still using some, but not enough, not that much. And then I can go up. And I can literally turn the dial down, right down. So I'm basically just using a little bit of a lean forwards and I can press. So it's just the weight's back and I lean forwards, and that's how I start to press. You could do it on a slope. So on an incline, your hands are a little bit lower than your feet and you press up and then you slowly decrease the incline. So that's a real cool way of doing it. It's tricky to adjust that dial, very like small increments, but that's a real good way of doing it. Now, guys, it's been quite a while. We had that mess around at the start as well with that dodgy stream. Just probably reduce the numbers a little bit, but we'll see. Let me know if you have any questions. My goal is to do one of these Mondays and Fridays. It'll be a little bit sketchy over Christmas. But if there's anything you want to go through in particular, let me know. I'll just continue with like picking a subject, I think is the best way. So we can get some specific questions on each thing. Is there anything else anyone who's on live wants me to cover quickly? Cool. Glad everyone enjoyed it. If you are watching live or watching the recording afterwards, I've got I'm doing all these for free. So I do my coaching and stuff as a business. So I do all these ones for free. With the goal is I'm trying to kit out the gym. So basically, I want to continue with all the live sessions and have this decked out with more equipment and do it so it's a lot easier for the people to watch at home. My intention is to continue to do them free. But I have got, if you want to contribute, I have a link in the description for the fund to kit the gym out and get the lighting and stuff and the audio we messed around with at the start even better. But yeah, I try and put the sessions out in advance. But it's tricky. Where I put the one out for yesterday's and then had to use a different link because of the issues we had with the audio. Okay, guys, I'm going to disappear. Let me know if you have any questions. I will still see the comments and stuff for this one, or you can message me direct through the website. And I'll speak to you soon. Have a great day, guys. Have a great weekend.